All right, get ready because we're taking a deep dive into Cradles of Civilization today. It's a topic that takes you way back to like the very beginnings of history, and helps you understand how we went from those little settlements to, well, everything around us, like all of it.
Yeah, what really gets me about this subject is that, civilization didn't just pop up in one spot. For a long time, people thought that's how it happened, but now we see it's way more complicated and interesting.
Totally. Imagine like multiple places around the world, each one figuring out stuff like cities, writing, specialized jobs, those complex social structures, all that stuff we think of as civilization, all on their own. And we're not just talking about a couple of places here. We're talking six major hubs that really got things going. Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient India, ancient China, the ancient Andes, and Mesoamerica.
And the cool thing is each cradle had its own vibe, its own set of inventions. Some were all about huge buildings, others built big trade networks, and some gave us the very first writing.
Okay, so let's start in the Fertile Crescent, a place often called like the cradle of civilization. Mesopotamia, right between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, is our first stop. Yeah. I uh, I remember reading about those rivers in school, but why were they so important?
Well, think of those rivers as the lifeblood of the place. They brought all that fertility, turning a place that could have been just desert into a place where they could grow tons of food. That abundance attracted people who eventually figured out agriculture, and that surplus of food gave them the freedom to try other things, art, government, technology. That's what helped Mesopotamia really take off.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about how geography changed the course of history, and then you have those ancient Mesopotamian cities with names that sounds straight out of history books. Tel El Weli, one of the oldest known Sumerian settlements from something like 5400 BC, and of course Ur, a city that's still famous today.
Totally. And those early Sumerians, man, they were real trailblazers. They developed cuneiform, one of the first writing systems. And it wasn't just random marks, it was a way for them to keep track of their history, laws, and beliefs. Super important for a civilization that wants to last.
It's like they unlocked this whole new level of communication and record keeping that changed civilizations for like thousands of years. Plus, they had organized governments not common back then.
Yeah.
And those amazing ziggurats, those huge stepped pyramids for their gods.
And the ziggurats weren't just about religion, they were symbols of how good the Sumerians were at architecture. They were able to do these huge building projects. That takes serious social coordination and engineering knowledge way ahead of their time.
Man, I wonder what it would have been like to just stand next to one of those things and then, Mesopotamia's history is full of empires rising and falling, almost like a movie, the Akkadian Empire under Sargon the Great, the Sumerians coming back, and then the Assyrians, Babylonians taking over. It's like constant change of power and culture.
And the cool thing is, these empires actually built on what came before them. Even when one civilization fell, its inventions and knowledge often stuck around and influenced the next empires. Like the Sumerians invented the wheel, and that spread all over, changing transportation and trade forever.
Okay, that's a good point. It wasn't just about individual empires. It was a constant flow of knowledge and innovation, like pushing civilization forward. Now let's shift over to another major player in the Fertile Crescent, ancient Egypt. This time, the Nile River is the big deal, providing that essential water for agriculture and encouraging a settled way of life, right?
Yeah, what's amazing about the Nile is how predictable it is. The floods every year, unlike the Tigris and Euphrates, which were kind of all over the place, were a good thing. The Egyptians used them to build awesome irrigation systems and plan their farming perfectly. This stability gave them a sense of order, which really affected their whole society.
I bet that predictability also affected their worldview, like their ideas about time and the cycle of life and death. And then you've got King Narmer, who unified Upper and Lower Egypt. What an accomplishment, creating a kingdom that lasted for centuries.
King Narmer's conquest was more than just about power. It was about bringing two different areas together, creating a shared culture with common beliefs, practices, and art. It was the beginning of what we call dynastic Egypt, a time of huge advancements in art, architecture, and how they governed.
And talking about advancements, you can't talk about ancient Egypt without mentioning those pyramids, right? The Giza pyramids and the Great Sphinx are like symbols of the old kingdom's power, their amazing building skills, and how complex their society was.
Those pyramids weren't just tombs for pharaohs, they were symbols of royal power, expressions of their religion, and incredible feats of engineering that still blow our minds today. Building those things took enormous resources, manpower, and technical skill, showing how advanced the Egyptians were in math, astronomy, and construction.
It's crazy to think they were so precise with the tools they had. Makes you appreciate how smart those ancient architects and engineers were. But here's where things get interesting. As the Old Kingdom went on, a new group emerged, the scribes and officials. They weren't like warriors or generals, but their knowledge and administrative skills made them pretty powerful.
That's a really important point. The rise of those scribes and officials shows how power was changing in Egypt. As the government grew, so did their influence. They might have even challenged the pharaoh's absolute power. Some people even think this growing power of the bureaucrats might have contributed to the Old Kingdom's eventual collapse.
It makes you think about how power works in any civilization. Was it just too much power in the hands of a few people, or were there other things going on? It's definitely something to think about as we keep going with our deep dive.
Yeah, for sure. The decline of civilizations is rarely just one thing. It's usually a mix of factors like power struggles, environmental changes, and pressure from other civilizations. It's kind of wild how different civilizations, even when they're miles apart, often had to deal with the same problems. Like, they all faced changes in the environment, they developed these complex social structures, and they all looked for ways to, express their beliefs and values through art and architecture and stuff. It shows how, similar the human experience is, this common thread that runs through our history.
Yeah, it's like we're all part of this big experiment, civilization, just trying out different solutions to the same basic problems.
Hmm.
So now, let's head east to ancient India, specifically to the Indus Valley civilization. We hear a lot about ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, but the Indus Valley seems a lot more mysterious. What makes this cradle so different?
Well, the Indus Valley civilization is super cool because it kind of messes with our ideas of what a civilization should look like. It was around in what's now Pakistan and northwest India, around 3300 to 1300 BCE. And it was huge, way bigger than either Egypt or Mesopotamia at the time. But even though it was big and advanced, we still don't know a lot about their culture.
Yeah, that's what makes it so interesting. Like putting together a puzzle, but some pieces are missing. We know they had these big, well-planned cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and Rocky Garhi. And get this, they had the world's first urban sanitation systems, like sewer systems. They were masters of urban planning with grid layouts, standardized brick sizes, and those impressive drainage systems. It tells us they were very organized and technologically advanced.
For sure. Their urban planning was way ahead of its time. And it wasn't just about practicality. There's evidence of public baths, granaries, and even this huge structure they call the Great Bath in Mohenjo-Daro. They might have used it for religious stuff or community gatherings.
Yeah, sounds like a society that valued cleanliness, order,
Mm.
and maybe even public ceremonies and stuff. But here's the big mystery they're writing. We have these cool indescript symbols, but we haven't figured out what they mean yet. It's like we can kind of see into their world, but we don't know what they're saying.
Yeah, the Indus is one of the biggest unsolved puzzles in archaeology. We have thousands of inscriptions on seals, pottery, and other stuff. But without something like a Rosetta Stone to help us, their language is still silent. Some people think it might be a Dravidian language, but nobody really knows for sure.
It makes you wonder what kind of stories those symbols hold. What they could tell us about their lives, their beliefs, what they were afraid of, what they dreamed about. Then, around 1700 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization starts to decline. What happened?
Well, that's another thing researchers are still working on. Climate change seems to be a big part of it. There's evidence the monsoons changed, leading to these long droughts, which would have been really bad for their agriculture.
It's a good reminder that even super advanced civilizations are still at the mercy of nature. Makes you wonder, though, if the climate hadn't changed, could the Indus Valley civilization have kept going? Could they even influence other civilizations around them?
Those are good questions, and unfortunately, we can only guess. What we do know is that parts of the Indus Valley civilization did survive and affected later Indian cultures. Their legacy lived on, even though their cities disappeared.
It's like their ideas and innovations became part of the region's culture, shaping Indian history in these subtle but important ways. Okay, let's keep moving east and go to ancient China, a cradle that's got thousands of years of history. We think about ancient China, we picture, dynasties, amazing art and philosophy. Where does it all begin?
Well, ancient China, just like all our cradles, starts with agriculture. They started growing millet as far back as 7000 BCE, then rice along the Yangtze River. This agricultural revolution let people settle down and, little by little, form more complex societies.
And it's not just the crops themselves, it's the stuff they figured out because of them, right? We see early irrigation systems, tools for planting and harvesting, and pottery to store extra grain, all essential steps towards becoming a civilization.
Exactly. And as these early farming communities got bigger, they started to meet each other, trade stuff, and compete for resources. This led to different cultures popping up, each with its own unique characteristics.
And one of the first examples of this is the Pylagane culture, going back to something like 7,000 to 5,000 BCE. They're known for their unique pottery and their egalitarian social structure. Everyone was pretty equal.
The Pylgan culture is cool because it makes us rethink the idea that social hierarchy is inevitable. Their settlements don't have, like, palaces or fancy burials, which suggests they were more communal.
Yeah, like they were trying out a different way of organizing themselves, based on cooperation and sharing instead of a strict hierarchy. But as we go forward in time, we see more complex societies, like the Yangshao culture. They were known for their polished stone tools and sericulture, that's silkworm cultivation, or raisin silkworms.
Sericulture was a game changer. Silk became a super valuable thing to trade, connecting China to trade networks all across Eurasia. It played a huge role in their economy and culture. And the Yangshao culture shows signs of growing social complexity, with bigger settlements and signs of, like, an elite class emerging.
So silk wasn't just a fancy fabric, it was a symbol of China's growing power and how connected they were to the rest of the world. And then we have the Longshan culture, coming up around 3000 to 2000 BCE. Their settlements were even bigger, with evidence of rammed earth walls. That suggests they needed more protection, maybe even because they were competing with other communities.
Yeah, the Longshan culture is a big step towards more social and political complexity. Their settlements were more like proto-cities, with specialized craftspeople, religious buildings, and evidence of social classes.
And it's during this time that we see something truly remarkable, jade carving. These super intricate jade objects weren't just pretty, they were symbols of power and status, probably worn by the elite or used in religious ceremonies.
The craftsmanship of those early jade objects is incredible. Like, the skill and artistry is amazing. It shows how sophisticated the Longshan culture was getting.
It's like they were using jade to express their worldview, their beliefs about the universe, and where humans fit into it all. But as we get close to 2000 BCE, things are about to change in a big way. The Bronze Age is dawning in China, and the mysterious Erlitou culture is emerging.
The Erlitou culture is a bit of a puzzle. They left behind these impressive archaeological sites with evidence of bronze making, huge construction projects, and palatial complexes that tell us their society had a lot of different social classes. But we don't have any writing from this time, which makes it hard to really understand their culture and how they govern themselves.
It's like they left these clues, but we're still trying to figure out the whole story. Some scholars think the Erlitou culture might be the legendary Xia dynasty, the first dynasty mentioned in Chinese historical texts.
Yeah, the Xia dynasty is mostly myth and legend. We don't have any solid archaeological proof that it existed, but the idea that the Erlitou culture could be this early dynasty is really cool and keeps historians and archaeologists debating.
It would be awesome if those myths turned out to be true. You know, it would add a whole new layer to our understanding of how Chinese civilization started. But even if the Xia dynasty stays a mystery, the Erlitou culture definitely set the stage for the Shang dynasty, the first dynasty with both archaeological evidence and writing. And speaking of the Shang, they were a major power, ruling from around 1600 to 1046 BCE. They left behind tons of artifacts, including these incredible bronze vessels and weapons, not to mention the oracle bones.
Oh, the oracle bones are amazing. They give us a direct look into what the Shang dynasty believed and how they practiced their religion. These bones and turtle shells had writing on them, and they used them for divination, like trying to get guidance from their ancestors and the spirits. The inscriptions show their questions, the answers they got, and even historical events. They're really valuable for understanding their world.
It's like they left us a diary of their spiritual life, And their bronze work was just as impressive. Those elaborate vessels and weapons weren't just tools, they were works of art, showing how good the Shang dynasty was at bronze casting and their, refined sense of beauty.
Totally. The Shang dynasty was a time of innovation and artistic growth. They developed a unique style that would influence Chinese art for centuries.
It's crazy how these early dynasties created cultural patterns and artistic traditions that are still around in Chinese culture today. But the Shang weren't the only ones doing cool stuff in ancient China. We also have the Sanxingdui culture, developing their own unique bronze-making techniques around the same time, showing just how diverse and creative ancient Chinese civilization was.
Yeah, the Sangsun culture shows that ancient China had a lot of regional differences. Their bronze artifacts with their distinct style and intricate designs, often showing mysterious figures and mythical creatures, challenge the idea that there was just one unified Chinese culture back then.
It's like a reminder that even within one cradle of civilization, you could have a bunch of different cultural expressions, different ways of seeing the world, and unique approaches to art and technology. So speaking of unique expressions, let's head to the ancient Andes, home to the oldest known civilization in the Americas. What sets this cradle apart from the others we've talked about?
The Andes is a really interesting place to study how civilization developed. They didn't have some of the things other cradles had, like writing, we can understand, but the people of the ancient Andes were really good at building things and had complex societies. They lived in a tough environment, adapting to the mountains and unpredictable weather of the Andes.
Yeah, it shows how resilient and adaptable humans are, how we can not only survive, but thrive in all kinds of environments. We see agriculture in the Andes going back to 9000 BCE, with crops like potatoes, quinoa, and beans. And by 4700 to 2500 BCE, they were already using canal irrigation in Peru, showing how clever they were at managing water in a dry region.
Those early irrigation systems were key to their survival. They let them grow more food, support more people, and establish permanent settlements.
And those settlements eventually became some of the first urban centers in the Americas. We have sites like Huaracanga and Sechin Bajo in Peru, dating back to around 3500 BCE, showing the early stages of cities in the region. But the big one is the Carol Supe civilization, also called Norte Chico, flourishing in Peru around 3200 BCE. What makes this civilization so special?
The Carol Supe civilization is kind of weird in a good way. It's the oldest known civilization in the Americas, older than the Olmec in Mesoamerica by hundreds of years. But here's the thing. They did all this without ceramics, without pottery.
Wait, no pottery. That's crazy. We always think of pottery when we think of early civilizations, right?
Yeah.
It's so useful for storing food, cooking, and even art. How did they get by without it?
That's one of the mysteries of Carol Supe. They used gourds and other natural stuff for containers, and they were really good at making textiles, using cotton and other fibers to make all sorts of things.
Yeah, it shows there's no one way to build a civilization. Different cultures find different solutions to the same problems. And even without pottery, the Karelsupi people were amazing builders. They built these huge platform mounds, sunken plazas, and residential complexes, showing a high level of social organization and architectural skill.
Their architecture is really impressive, especially since they didn't have metal tools. They mostly used stone, wood, and earth to build these massive structures, probably used for religious ceremonies, public gatherings, and homes for the elite.
Makes you wonder what those gatherings were like, what they did, what stories they told each other. And here's another interesting thing about Karelsupi. There's no evidence of war or anything built for defense. Does that mean they were peaceful?
That's a question that keeps archaeologists up at night. The lack of walls and weapons suggests that war might not have been a big part of their culture. But it's also possible they had other ways of dealing with conflict or defending themselves that just haven't survived.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. We can only guess about how they interacted with each other and kept order in their society. But one thing's for sure, the Karelsupi civilization left a big mark on the region. Their legacy lives on in the ruins of their cities and all the mysteries they left behind. Man, it's amazing, right? Each of these civilizations had to deal with stuff like environmental change and figuring out how to organize their societies, but they came up with such unique and innovative solutions. Really shows how creative and tough our ancestors were. So, ready for our last stop on this tour of the beginnings of civilization. Let's go to Mesoamerica. I kind of have a soft spot for this region, maybe because I love those ancient pyramids and those intricate Mayan calendars. But really, Mesoamerica is where we find the origin of maize. Corn, that super important crop that would feed millions of people all over the Americas and even beyond.
Yeah, the domestication of maize was huge in Mesoamerica. It caused a population boom, the development of settled villages, and eventually, these complex societies with specialized jobs and social hierarchies. Maize was a reliable food source that meant people could stay put and have time to develop other aspects of their culture.
It's mind-blowing how one plant could change history so much.
Yeah.
And the evidence for early maize domestication takes us all the way back to southern Mexico, like 7000 BCE. Places like the Coxcatlan Caves and Sipacate have those maize pollen grains, giving us a glimpse into this agricultural revolution. But maize wasn't the only thing going on in ancient Mesoamerica. By 1900 BCE, the Mochaya people were already enjoying cacao beverages. Talk about a tasty innovation.
You know, the Mochaya culture doesn't get enough credit. They made some big contributions to Mesoamerican civilization. They were early adopters of pottery, developed some sophisticated farming techniques, and even show evidence of social hierarchy, which means they were starting to form more complex social structures.
Yeah, it reminds us that those smaller, less-known cultures can be super important in paving the way for the civilizations that come later. And speaking of groundbreaking, here come the Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. They appeared around 1600 to 1500 BCE, starting in San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, a place strategically located near fertile land and the Coatzacoalcos River, which was like their highway system.
The Olmec civilization is known for its awesome art, its massive architecture, and its early forms of writing and calendars. You can see their influence on later Mesoamerican cultures, like the Maya and the Aztecs, especially in their religious symbols, artistic designs, and their shared idea of rulers being divine kings.
They were definitely trendsetters, and they weren't afraid to show off their power and wealth either. The Olmec elite wore jade, obsidian, and magnetite, showing they controlled trade and had access to rare materials. And of course, we're going to mention those colossal heads, those giant stone sculptures, some weighing over 20 tons, are just iconic. They probably represent Olmec rulers, and their size and, imposing presence say a lot about the power and authority of the Olmec elite.
Yeah, those colossal heads show how skilled the Olmec were at carving stone and how they could organize huge groups of people to build these massive monuments. They also highlight how important visual symbols were in their culture. They used art to communicate messages about power, authority, and religion.
It's like they were saying, hey, look at us, we're in charge, and we got the resources and the people to prove it. But even powerful civilizations have to deal with change and decline. San Lorenzo, once a busy center, was mysteriously abandoned around 900 BCE, right around the time that Levanta, another Olmec center, started to become important. What happened?
Well, there are a few theories about why San Lorenzo declined. Some experts think it was an internal rebellion or an invasion by another group. Others say it was environmental changes like shifts in the river or volcanic activity that messed up their agriculture or trade routes. The rise of Levanta, with its own impressive buildings, including the Great Pyramid, suggests that power shifted within the Olmec heartland, but we're not exactly sure why.
It reminds us that civilizations aren't static. They're always changing, adapting to pressures, and sometimes experiencing big shifts in power. But no matter what happened, the Olmec civilization had a huge impact on Mesoamerica. They laid the groundwork for many of the cultural and religious practices that would later flourish in the Mayan and Aztec civilizations.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the Olmec contributed a lot to Mesoamerican civilization. Their art styles, religious beliefs, and political structures influenced generations of artists, priests, and rulers, creating a cultural continuity that lasted for centuries. They were pioneers, the ones who set the stage for all the vibrant and diverse cultures that would develop in Mesoamerica.
Okay, so there we have it, our whirlwind tour of the 6 cradles of civilization. From the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to the Andes Mountains, we've seen the birth of cities, the rise of empires, the invention of writing, and the emergence of complex societies that basically set the stage for the world we live in today. It's been a journey through time, a chance to see how ingenious, creative, and resilient our ancestors were. They faced huge challenges, but they built these incredible legacies that still shape our world.
I think it's amazing that these civilizations, even though they were so far apart and developed on their own, had so much in common. They dealt with similar problems, came up with clever solutions, and left behind legacies that still inspire and fascinate us today.
It reminds us that, even with all our differences, we're all part of this one big human story, this ongoing experiment we call civilization. And the more we learn about the past, the more we appreciate how connected human history is and the huge impact those early civilizations had on making the world what it is today. So, what does this all mean for you? I hope this deep dive has made you curious, made you want to learn more about these incredible cultures and the amazing people who shaped them.
Take some time to think about what you've learned. Which cradle speaks to you the most? What about their culture or achievements grabs your attention? Maybe this is just the beginning of your own exploration, a chance to dig deeper into the mysteries of the past and discover the rich tapestry of human history.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring. And who knows, maybe you'll make your own discoveries, find new insights that help us understand our shared human story even better. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the cradles of civilization. Until next time, keep on exploring.